Well, welcome to the session, everybody. I'm Angela. I am the Director of Hack Diversity, and our topic today is how might we show, but not tell, our racial equity, diversity, and inclusion values as we scale. And I'm really excited to be joined by a remarkable group of panelists who all happen to be not only, remarkable individuals, but really strong Hack partners over the 5 years that we've been in operation. So if you're new to Hack Diversity, we are a workforce development nonprofit that's currently run out of the New England Venture Capital Association. And we like to say that we are a dual impact model. So as we think about diversifying our teams and thinking about who gets to shape the innovation industry and the products and who gets to benefit from it, we are not only focused on bridging talent into the workforce, where we're working with companies to think about how on the company end, the responsibility to evolve hiring, management, retention, promotion processes and systems to really tackle accessibility, inclusivity on the corporate end. So just a quick round of intros. With me today is Adrian Bernard, who is the Senior Vice President of Admit Hub, of People Ops and Experience. Ashley Janot, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong. Ashley is Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Program Manager at Salsify, and Frankie Rhodes, who is the People Ops Manager at Lola. So really excited to be joined by this group. And I think that the way we're setting up the session today is about 20 minutes for me to just hang out and chat with these folks. And then afterwards, we'll break out into small groups to dive into the topics a bit more. If you're lucky enough to be with one of the panelists, they will kind of push the conversation into more provocative zones. So just to get started, I would love to open it up to the panelists to talk about what your first job was, and how was your transition into tech? Did you always want to be in tech? And if not, how was that transition for you? And opening up the floor to anybody who wants to jump in.
All right, I'll go first. I think technically my first job in tech was, so my first job in tech was with an ad tech company, and it was a startup also. It was my first time with a startup, and I didn't really know what it meant to be in a startup. I was like 24 or 25, and I was just along for the ride. And I think what I recall the most is that making the transition, I really relied on people that either I reported to or I worked with that I could look up to. So having really strong people around me that could help show me the ropes and give me a sense of what my path could be in tech was really important, and really helped with the transition to a startup environment and a tech environment.
Awesome. Frankie?
Lola is actually my first tech job. I had my transition was a career transition. I'd spent the first 15 years of my working life in retail and grew into retail management and done that for a long time. And then decided I wanted to retail retire because I wanted to do something that involved me sitting most of the time. But I'd always wanted to get into something else people related. I'm not brave enough to be like a firefighter or anything like that. But I knew I wanted to help. So I just I left retail and was looking around for jobs. And then a former manager of mine pulled me into recruiting. And I never really thought about jumping, that being a start, because I didn't know how to get into it. And then I worked at an agency for almost a year. And then Lola found me and was like, hey, you want to hang out with us? And I was like, yeah. So here I am. I've been here almost 2 years. And it's been a good time.
That's awesome. So I want to double tap into that. Lola reached out to you. Did they LinkedIn stalk you, or like how did that relationship form?
Yeah. I got hit up by our at the time director of people, and we'd gone back and forth on LinkedIn. And my brain, I was reading the description in my brain. I was like, I don't know, like this sounds like, I'm not sure yet. But I kept talking with more people. I got invited in for an interview. And the things that they were looking to do with their just kind of hiring and interviewing process were things that I'd kind of done in retail management with helping load out teams and just, doing that L&D kind of stuff. And I was like, well, I get to sit now and I get to do what I was doing before and learn a whole new skill set at the same time. And then that turned into, the gateway for, doing HR certification and getting my APHR last year. And now I'm actually like in the people space where I want to be, which I had no clue how to get into before. And now I'm in it and I'm like, oh, this is kind of dope.
That's awesome. And then Ashley, to round us out.
Yeah, so similar. This is technically my role in tech. So I've been in the diversity and inclusion space I joke that I've been doing this work for a very long time since, but professionally just been in this work for the past 7 years. And doing consulting, I did consulting for the educational space, but then also for different clients within various industries like financial, tech, et cetera. So this is my first role at Solidify, just doing DEI in one tech company and overseeing it. So it's definitely exciting. I think like what I originally wanted to do, I think it would be an actress. That was because I have a flair for the dramatics. But I feel like I can definitely add a little bit of that into my work in DEI. So
I think in the DEI landscape right now, there's lots of drama. So we're excited to dig into that a little later. But I think this is like a really good segue into just kind of the meat of the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion. And you all, you're all really good at your jobs and just remarkable people in general, but you also happen to represent affinity groups are really underrepresented in the tech space. So do you ever recall in your journey so far a moment where you really wanted to leave the industry? And if so, would you mind sharing about that moment and the context of that moment?
Not really. I think for me, it's made me just want to be in it more because I'm like, there's things that I've experienced in my previous career that has a lot of similarities in the startup space in general. And for me, it's just like, all right, well, now I'm in a position to actually put up a fight and say what needs to be said and put it out there that like, hey, not even just the idea of like underrepresentation, right? But it comes in the micro when you really look at it, because we're talking about tone policing. We're talking about, all right, cool. Well, we'll change things up and we'll start to hire and balance things out, but we'll pay less. And then it's like, cool, well, we'll pay less, but we will also give you less work. So it looks like you're underperforming. Like it's all these little nitty gritty things that I've seen people talk about and I have had happen to me and I've seen it happen to other people. And it's just kind of a hot mess. So I'm just like, I want all the smoke. I'm here to bring all the chaos with me and help change things up. So if anything, I want to be in it more and longer and try and make an impact.
I love that. Any different angle, different takes, or doubling down on breaking sentiment?
I think it's from the DEI lens as a practitioner in the space. I think in the past year, seeing as performative, acts of DEI and allyship from organizations. I think it's very easy to fall into that silo of just wanting to leave. Because I think, and this is like a part 2, and we'll probably get into this, I don't think people really understand the gravity of work that DEI practitioners do. It's one thing, as someone has done this in my separate business, I do these conversations for educators. I'm very comfortable in the fact of like, I'm talking about critical race theory, feminist gender ideologies, all that stuff like that. Like we're being very, we're introducing pedagogies and theories into this work. And I'm focused. I know who I'm talking about. In the corporate space, you are the representative of every dimension of diversity. And I think a lot of people don't understand that diversity practitioners, there's a lot of learning and unlearning that comes up in this work. How I practiced this work 3 years ago is different from where I am right now. And so I think there are plenty of times where, especially when you're these think pieces and op-eds that come up about like DEI not being successful or whatever, and the emphasis is pushed back on the practitioners, but not really thinking about, well, did your organization set them up to even succeed in the first place? And so like things of that nature definitely caused me to be like, damn, this is exhausting. And again, I'm just talking about just, you know, my 7 years of doing this. I think that from that lens where I'm like, okay. But I think to Frankie's point, like there are new challenges that come up that inspire you. There are moments that come up where you've made a difference, that there's been small, impactful wins where you're like, okay, I can still continue to do this. But yeah, I'm human in this work. So yeah, it definitely happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm aligned with Ashley and Frankie. Like it feels like a responsibility to stay and keep pushing and being a voice. And, you know, I've got many years of experience of seeing, you know, different women in tech and what happens to their careers and the challenges they come up against, and being, you know, working with different people in tech and seeing the challenges that they've had or lack of challenges for their success. And so for me, it's like a great, like a responsibility that I need to stay and continue to do the work. And I had an interesting experience when I left A6 Digital last year of feeling like I had done so much and then recognizing that I didn't do enough to ensure that the access and equity and inclusion remained when I left. And then for me, that just like doubled down that sense of like, oh, I have to stay and make sure I do even more at the next place. There's a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of the people that are doing the work. And I think for me, I recognize that I need to continue to do that. So I haven't really ever thought about leaving, I think because of that. And also like, I love the chaos. So I'm here for the journey.
And so I want to dive deeper into something that Ashley kind of referred to, like that tension of like the learning, the unlearning, the wanting to see results immediately, even though this is a centuries old problem, and kind of having that responsibility live on the shoulders of like the DEI lead or like the, you know, certain individuals within an organization. What are some tensions that you can share about your experiences with the work? And what are your responses to when people try to shift responsibility or assign, I don't want to go negative and say assign blame, but that's how it sometimes kind of feels if something isn't successful in the immediate short term.
I think it's always the nitty gritty that kind of sets off that domino effect. From within, I haven't experienced a ton of tension when it comes to trying to figure out what plan A through Z is, right? Like I'm very much, I need all of the blocks laid out and then I can pick the 4 or 5 that I think might work. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. We go back to the drawing board. We have this thing where that we say we put the problems ahead of us instead of between us. And it's things are always going to be weird, right? A lot of it from in my experience has been outside of the organization, where there's kind of all of these think pieces on how to incentivize certain things and how someone should actually be doing something when this isn't like a cookie cutter process. My biggest argument for a lot of this work is you can build all the software and sell all the software and hire all the speakers you want, but if you're not, you can't automate this process. And that's my biggest kind of beef with the universe right now. And when it comes to inclusion and equity, there's only so much you can do. You have to come back to having a smaller conversation as individuals and smaller groups. So that's been my biggest pain point personally to try and get across. Like you have to have the conversation, and it's about practice. Like you get good at something because you keep trying it, because you know it's the right thing to do. So when it's game time, it's just automatic. It's second nature. I believe we'll get there. I don't know when. I'd like to be alive to see it.
Man, so many gold nuggets there.
I just want to echo what Frankie's saying, and like, I think a layer of that's so important is the modeled behavior. Like for me, one of the things that I've learned in the past 6 months is figuring out what am I trying to control because I think that I know how to do this and everyone's relying on me, so I should do this. And what can I let go of in that area? And then what can I just model and be consistent about and showcase to the other leaders around me so that they see that and they start to operate that way as well. Obviously, there are certain things that I have to control when it comes to commitments we made or, things related to people ops and hiring and processes and structures and, harassment policies, all that kind of stuff, right? But as Frankie's saying, so much of this is in the day-to-day interactions and conversations, and I can't control what those other leaders are going to do. I can advise them, I can recommend, and then I can model that. So I think for me, that's been a really critical turning point in terms of sustainment, because this is not going to be automated. This is not going to be like push the button, we're good. So it's really about those consistent behaviors that you can showcase to other people.
Yeah, I think to your point, Angela, with how you phrased the question in terms of addressing a systemic issue that has existed for centuries, oftentimes within the tech space or industries, they're investing in DEI, some from a performative lens, but they're thinking about the representation by numbers. And so oftentimes there's this tension for me, because if you want to talk about diversifying engineering, well, you have to talk about the racial inequities that exist within STEM. And so then you also have to talk about the inequities that exist because of, access and proximity to the community. So and these are things that people are not thinking about, right? Your many CEOs and your executive leaders are not thinking about it from this lens because they're like, we'll solve the problem. And to solve the problem means that you have to address the inequities and get comfortable in acceptance of you're not going to have, in my opinion, you're not going to have an engineering team that's 50% people of color, particularly with emphasis on Black and Latinx. That's not going to happen because for all reasons. But what can you do within your role and structure and your influence to help mitigate that problem? And so how are you investing in partnerships and sourcing or opportunities for underrepresented youth in tech? So I think what happens is everybody wants the quickness of it. They want to see the results, but they don't understand that you can't approach DEI the same way you approach your revenue goals, right? You can't approach DEI the same way you approach your productivity and services goals. That's different. You are set up to succeed in that way. You are not set up to succeed in DEI because the system is unfair. So until we are comfortable and reckoning of that, so that's within my work, I'm very comfortable with saying, you want to talk about diversity, you need to talk about equity.
Yeah.
And you can't get to inclusion without talking about diversity. But in order to do all of this, equity needs to be your framework. So that's the tension.
Yeah. This is all the snaps. So from your lens, so over the past year, the compounding trauma of the past year, particularly for historically marginalized communities, we saw, especially all corporations in general, but definitely in the tech space, a lot of solidarity statements. How can we move beyond the solidarity statement? And in particular, I'm interested in what failed within your organizations and what your next priorities are. I think oftentimes in these DEI conversations, everyone's always wants to talk about what they're doing well, and but we don't talk enough about the failures and how we can collectively learn from those failures, and truly have this be an iterative process.
I love this question because this is what I think a lot about. I think that kind of going off of what Ashley said, thinking about what's next, because so many companies said, okay, we're only going to recruit this way, or we're going to have certain goals around hiring this way, or we're going to put Rooney rules in place. We're going to do all this stuff to start to add diversity into our organization, when what they really meant was we're going to start to add people that don't look like us into our organization. And specifically, I think Black employees into our organization, but they wouldn't say that. And then, you know, what happens then? You know, what else are you doing internally, right? So I think if you haven't, as an organization, started to develop understanding of what inclusion looks like, understanding of what equity looks like within your team, within your leadership team, within your organization as a whole, you have to do that next. But I think one of the big things that I've been thinking about a lot is how are we now sponsoring and sometimes mentoring the people that we've hired to have paths to success and leadership at the organizations, right? That has to be what's next. Don't just keep filling the team up. Look at the top, right? And I loved all those people on LinkedIn and Twitter and wherever they were challenging companies. Like, I don't want to see your public statement. I want to see your executive team. I don't want to see your public statement. I want to see your board. I want to see your investors. And if you look at ours, it's not diverse at all. And so I think one of the things that we've been focused on absolutely is hiring in a different way. And I think one of our failures is that we haven't put in place ways for employees to then be set up for success and have paths to success. And that's something we're talking about now. I think the other area that's so important is it's not just about the HR stuff, right? It's the company as a whole. And that's like, for me, you know, the practitioners that are focused on diversity, inclusion, and equity should not report to HR. They should not be HR. They should report right up to the CEO, because it's about the business as a whole. And making that shift has been something that I've been focused on as well. I wouldn't say it's a failure. I just haven't been able to fully make the shift. And I'll also own, we haven't made any kind of statement at all as a company. And it's something we're talking about a lot. It's something we've been working on. And to me, it's a tricky thing to think about, like, how do we ensure that people know that we're passionate about and interested in doing this work? And we want people who want to come and be a part of that and not be performative. So I think that's a failure as well, because I wish we had said something at some point, and we will eventually. But yeah, I think that's kind of where my head's at with all of that.
I'm so glad you brought up the point of the onus, Adrian, because I have this confliction with myself where I'm just like, all right, cool. Like, I'm in a people position, so my goal is to cater to everyone, but you can't cater to everyone the same way. But also being a little bit newer in comparison to the space, I think a lot about the other piece of this, where I appreciated it last summer when we started having these conversations at Lola, that our executives just said to us, was like, hey, we recognize all of us look the same on this team. And like I said before, just the conversation, right? Like, how do we go to step two? Some of the things that we started doing and I wanted to make an attempt to be better at is just sharing all of the data aspects of things with managers, especially since we have some newer managers on the squad. That's just a foundation, though. That's the support. It comes back to the conversations. The executive team, you know, my manager asks me all the time whenever we have some kind of conversation around a event that created tension of some sort. It's how do I support you? And I don't always have an answer. And I think that's something that she has respected. And I think that's something that executive teams, as they start to kind of figure out what the onus looks like with leading a charge on this, it's, you know, start publishing that data across the company and not just with managers, because I think that's actually important. That's something that I plan on starting in the next couple of weeks. I don't know on what frequency, but just to see how people respond to it, see what happens. And I'm glad you brought up the Rooney Rule thing too, because I've always had mixed feelings about that joint. I'm just like, I get, again, the data aspect of things, but what are we doing to keep someone like myself engaged and shown that I'm valued? And we're still figuring that out. Like we've gotten deep into step one, and we need to kind of fill in step 2 to see how to, break it down and figure out the best ways to keep everyone feeling like they're respected and cared for.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate the Rooney Rule. I'm sorry, but so in terms of the failures that we've had identified, particularly at my organization, Salsify, prior to me starting, they did initiate the Rooney Rule. What happens, and I think this is a conversation that needs to be explored more in terms of the representation that you want. Many organizations in tech are struggling with both racial diversity and gender diversity. Oftentimes when you implement rules like the Rooney Rule, what you'll see sometimes that the decisions managers will make, and what we saw at Salsify, is that you'll increase your white woman representation. Is this a win for diversity? Yes, for gender diversity, but then you're still not being committed to your POC representation commitments your POC representation commitments. And even then, what we also found within POC representation, within our organization, we weren't being explicit, right? There is this nuanced ideology that you're going to be, for tech companies you're going to see overrepresentation, if you will, of people who identify as Asian. But then when you break that down, do you see them in leadership? And so there's this, to Frankie's point, when you're talking about how do you service these historically underrepresented folks in tech and marginalized communities, you have to approach it as, well, one, you need Black and Latinx representation, period. And that's a commitment that I've been having my organization work on, where we're being more explicit in terms of who do we need to see and who is missing. But then on the flip side, when it comes to leadership representation, we're thinking of all encompasses of racial diversity, because there is none. And we also understand that initiatives that we have started, particularly in the Rooney Rule, haven't benefited us in the way that we have wanted. And so we are thinking strategically about what else needs to be done. And what we're finding is, as a failure, and I'll wrap this up quickly, is that our networks for our leadership and managers, our organization is 77% white. Their networks are white. And so if we're initiating programs like our program, and we're still tapping into these pools that are not racially diverse and not yielding the results that we want, then we need to assess, okay, there's a part 2 that we need to do. There's something that we need to fix here. So in terms of failures, we haven't been explicit. We weren't previously explicit on who we need who needs to be here. And we also haven't been we haven't acknowledged how our networks and our referral pool has kind of put us in this unfortunate silo. So, but we have the opportunity, and we're working on, really thinking about our sourcing partnerships and being very clear and explicit about our upcoming goals.
So before we break off into breakout groups, this has been I think so much wisdom has been shared in the conversation so far. I want to kind of wrap it up in from a duality lens. So what are you currently most frustrated about hearing in the realm of DEI or racial equity, and what gives you joy in these conversations? If anything.
I think I'm going to start with joy. What gives me joy is that we're still talking about it. I was really worried, and I'm a pretty optimistic person, and I was really worried last year in this time frame that this was going to be like a 6-month fake it kind of thing, and then it was just going to sweep it back under the rug and go back to what was easy. And we're not. And I'm so happy that we're still having these conversations. So that's giving me a lot of joy. And I feel like I've seen progress. Recognizing that progress is going to be so long-term. Even seeing organizations like Hack growing the way that you're growing brings me so much joy. And I think, we were talking about this backstage, but, stuff like Basecamp, that stuff is still happening. And it's like, come on, why are you trying to shut down who people are at work? You can't do that. So that's what's frustrating me. I'll just keep that really brief.
My frustrations are still kind of all over the place, but I'm also still learning a lot too. I think my biggest one is I'm going to go there, knowing that there are certain spaces that I have, certain people in spaces that I've engaged with in the solidarity statements, and just kind of like that gut check of like, all right, I know y'all really don't get down like that. So don't go ahead and do your thing, but people who've interacted with you really know what's up. But the thing that brings me the most joy and continues to do so, honestly, people like y'all. I don't feel like I'm by myself. I feel like I have not just a network, but a series of mentors that I can just hit up, and I see the statuses on LinkedIn and the Slack channel conversations. And I don't always say much, and sometimes I feel like I should say more. But I like to watch. I like to observe and see all the different light bulbs go off. I love seeing people have that aha moment of like, oh, this is like actually how things need to be done, and we need to at least try. It's the people who are continuing to be in spaces that we're in, and putting up a fight that makes me the happiest.
Yeah, for me, the joy is, and I'm a big believer in like just the small wins. It's been really great just to see people change their ideologies and approach. Like it's just fascinating. It's fun it really is great to see people really engaging thoughtfully in this work and understanding the very complexity of this work, but then are just making the commitment to learn and unlearn and co-learn. And that has been a great win. I think the frustrations for this work is really just around support for DEI practitioners. I think many of us have built our own networks. I think when you think about these op-eds and think pieces that are coming up about DEI, again, like I said earlier, they're focused on like why they're not failing, but we're not focusing on the support and leverage needed for DEI practitioners to succeed. And also just like the mental exhaustion of this work. So my ultimate frustration is just not enough people care, I will say, given to DEI practitioners in this work. But yeah, there's definitely joy in the small wins, but yeah.
I'm going to take a liberty to answer this myself. Working in HAC, and my entire professional trajectory has about 10 years now, has been at the intersection of STEM education, access, and workforce development, economic mobility, and corporate responsibility. So from where I sit, I think one of the most frustrating things for me is the kind of the perfectionism that people want to approach their DEI with, and we can't start because I need to have a 5-year plan for it, and that's not necessarily the right approach for DEI, or it's not the most productive approach for learning. And I think what gives me joy is the people who are brave enough to say, I said this thing, and I don't understand why that's wrong, and then that conversation that stems from it. And we need those people to have that space to be truly not know why something is like not wrong or don't have the context, and be educated, and vice versa for the person who's doing the educating to be open to educating and truly moving forward in partnership. So those are my 2 cents there as well. So I'm going to turn it over to the breakout groups. I saw Jenny posted some instructions in the chat. I do have some prompter questions, but I think if you're in a group with Adrian, Frankie, or Ashley, you're in great hands. And so my 3 kind of buckets of prompter questions I would love for folks to talk about are meritocracy and the fallacy of it, people management, and then also race and identity in the workplace conversation. So I'm happy to chat those prompter questions out within the chat, but again, hopefully you get to be in a room with one of these folks and dive deeper into all that was discussed today. So thank you to the panelists for educating me, and hopefully we can continue the conversation.